Hello and welcome to another conversation. We are continuing. This is part two of our conversation with Satish Manchikanti. If you haven't watched episode one, please just go back, watch it. It'll give you a lot more background on some of the things that we're going to talk today. Satish, let's continue our conversation. Now, your work at UNI is primarily volunteer based.
Yeah.
And Peter Drucker has a lot to say about leading and managing volunteers. How do you build a volunteer movement? Because you have a vision, and that's something that your heart is set on. Now, to find people who feel the same way about the same thing, it's going to take some time. What
Sure.
was your initial journey like? Just getting your first 10, 15 volunteers.
I think initial journey was easy, getting 10, 15 volunteers
Okay.
because they tend to come from your own. They're your closest friends.
Oh, okay. I didn't
Right.
realize that. Okay.
But that's the essence of it because your closest friends come along and do it along with you, not just because of the cause,
Right.
but because of the community,
Okay.
because they're friends with you, right? And that's really the secret. Now, how do you take that recipe, and then how do you keep expanding that community, right? That's really the magic sauce, right? One thing we always say is people will come for the cause, but they'll stay for the community,
I agree. Yes.
right? And that's been the journey. We started as a bunch of friends, but then we took that and said, okay, how can we include more people in it? Yeah, and how do you kind of make it sort of a community that's inclusive, where people come and say, hey, I want to be part of this. I love the cause, and here's the right set of people, same values. I want to hang out with them. I want to do it with them. So I think that's been the
So beyond this first group of friends and family, extended family, how did the recruitment progress beyond that? Is it just word of mouth? And I'm just rolling the top of my mind. It could be word of mouth because I go and tell somebody, hey, I'm working with Satish.
Sure.
Or someone hears from the beneficiaries of your work and they say, hey, I want to be doing that. So what are the different sources that volunteers came to you from?
Yeah. So the first layer of obviously was from our social circle, but then it was obviously social media, right? And we started about 10 years ago. Facebook was just the right place at the right time,
Right.
and in fact, the first person we hired as an NGO or as a charity was our first employee was a media person,
Okay.
right? Suchita, who just passed out of doing a media course, we got her, started a Facebook page, started making short videos, and started really sort of engaging people on social media and saying, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do. Why don't you come and join us? So creating that awareness and creating that call to action was the sort of a way to kind of take the cause beyond our own social circle and kind of really include other people. So that was the kind of a second layer. But now, like, because the community is so big, it's the present volunteers who have tasted it. They're going and telling their friends. And by and large, I think a good part of the community comes because someone's like, hey, I've done this. I can vouch for it. You got to come and do this. So I think that's how it works.
Sunita, you said was your first employee. How many employees do you have now?
Right now, I think we've got 85 employees.
And how many volunteers?
Any given year, we have about 2,000 volunteers.
2,000 volunteers. And these volunteers are spread across the country,
35 cities as of today.
35 cities as of today. How do you hold them together, Satish? Because you're here, your office is here, technically speaking. And these are volunteers who don't show up every day to work for a salary.
Sure.
They are giving out of their own time because they believe in the change that UNI is bringing. So how do you hold them together when they're so big in number, so large in number, 2,000, 35 cities?
Great. It's a great question. I think there are two sides to it, right? As a volunteer, what holds me, what attracts me, what keeps me here, and then how do we do it organizationally, right? I think one thing we need to understand about what we need, like especially when you look at the kind of work we do, where you're a volunteer, you're coming and doing it not because you're getting paid. it's because you're finding a purpose, right? I think it's called logotherapy, and all of us need a bit of it. They say that when you're going through a tough time, you need three things in life. I think this season it really applies. Number one is you need a cause. When you get up in the morning, if you don't do it, someone else is going to suffer, right? So it's very important for us to be involved in something where it's something bigger than us, bigger than our own needs. That's number one. I think the second thing people need is a redemptive narration, a positive narration of what's happening in their life. The third thing is positive community, right? Create a community again, as I said before, where they're like, wow, I want to be part of this, right? And that's the boxes you'd want to take. Hey, can you give them a cause where they get up and say, hey, I need to get out of my bed because if I don't do it, someone else is going to suffer. They need it. We all need it. Second is some sort of a narrative where they're saying, hey, there's a meaning and, I can, there's a story, right? We all work because there's a story in our head. The third thing is I love the people. Right? Now, how do we create that experience for a volunteer is where we got to think through as an organization. I think if you really ask me, how do you do it? Our vision statement is building communities of change, and that's what we're trying to build. But how do you do that? Is your 80-20 really is the kind of leadership you build. Because if sitting here, you want to replicate that culture where somebody sitting in, we have our latest chapter is Srinagar.
Okay.
So somebody sitting there feeling the same values and same sense of purpose, a lot hinges on the kind of leadership you build. So we invest a lot in the leaders we build. So we have about 80 staff, but of all 80 staff are not involved working with volunteers. We have about 30 managers who work with volunteers.
Okay.
So really investing in those 30 managers, right? And a lot of those 30 managers are homegrown leaders. They all started as volunteers, then they became leaders, and then they're managers, a lot of them, right? So they're really sort of conditioned to think, understand what it takes to sort of really drive this mission. So that's your layer one. But layer two is you have 30 managers, and then we've got about 500 leaders, right? And those 500 leaders really sort of work with these volunteers, right? And we really cut it down to sizes. One example of magic happens in small groups. We all know that, right? That's why there are cell groups.
Yes.
Right? But even when you think of an organization like Amazon, Jeff Bezos, when Amazon was really exploding, he came up with this thing called 2-pizza rule. He said, hey, if you can't feed the whole team with 2 pizzas, you're too big. Right? They're not going to understand the vision. They're not going to understand the culture. They're not going to understand the why. So we've really applied that principle. So across India, though we are humongous, we think in the ratios of 10.
Okay.
For every 10 volunteers, there's one leader.
Okay.
Right. So, and those 10 people I can really mentor. Right? I think Jesus did it well with 12.
Right.
Right. So with those 10 people, I can really sort of pass on those values and the culture and stuff like that. So small groups really is the essence of it.
Right. No, I understand. I appreciate how you brought out the importance of the sense of purpose everyone wants to feel beyond just surviving. And logotherapy by Viktor Frankl actually points us to the fact that there is that spirit and the passion in us to think beyond our circumstances and not just worry for ourselves, to think of how we can better somebody else's life. Now, these 2,000 volunteers, now the fact that they are in 35 cities itself makes it difficult for you to be personally in touch with them or even your staff, the 30 that you mentioned. Now, last year, we've had pandemic play havoc with all areas of our life, and especially work. Now, the two things that I want to talk about, one is how did you and I office manage to keep driving the volunteers through these difficult periods? And the second one, more importantly, is that the beneficiaries, the children, the beneficiaries of your programs,
Sure.
It's a very strong human bonding and connect that they have with these volunteers, and whatever number of hours they see them per week. And for for these children to suddenly lose that touch, even for a week of absence, it would kind of make them anxious because for some of
Sure.
them, this could be the highlight of the week.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then and suddenly for months, you are gone. How was this journey difficult for you and how did you manage?
Yeah. So it's been a very tough journey, right? To be honest, when looking back last March, I had absolutely no idea. First time when we went under the lockdown, because our whole program, because we're so big on community, the whole program was built on human connection, right? It's about volunteers coming to learning centers and kids really kind of getting to sit with them. And our program is built in such a way that it's a 1:1 ratio. One volunteer gets to sit with one volunteer, really mentor. One volunteer to one student.
1:1?
1:1.
That's big.
Yeah, so that's what we strive towards, But what we claim is we are 1:3. So for every 3 children, we have at least one volunteer. So that's what we work towards. But so sort of going from sort of having built that over 10 years, right? It was as if somebody pulled the rug under my feet.
Right.
It took me 10 years to get there. So it was tough. And March when I got up and I had to like vision cast and say, hey, how are you going to deal with this? I think one thing we kind of said right in the beginning is, hey, we're not going to survive through it. We're going to thrive through it. We're going to make the most out of it. We're going to learn. We're going to get stronger. You're going to find more ways to impact kids. Yeah, and it was a very interesting journey. It's easier if you're a charity or a church because the mission is such a big thing, right? You're all pulled together by purpose.
Right.
So it was easier for us, and the staff and the volunteers and the leaders really rallied together. Right. Obviously, the first thing we had to do is figure out technologies, figure out tech, and so we did the whole sort of process of tech scaling. We raised funds, we ran campaigns called Donate Your Device, and we got those devices to our children. We figured out how do you teach children online, right, virtually. What are the right ratios? How do you do curriculum? And even with that, you can't reach all kids. Right, because kids may be in a place where even if I give a laptop, they may not have a network, right? So we built like 3 different models, right? There was a high connectivity model, medium connectivity, and low connectivity model. And low connectivity model was WhatsApp model. How do you teach your students through WhatsApp, right? Where videos, our volunteers would make videos, or they would take videos and they would send it to the kids, and then they would have quick calls. Right, so we kept that connection going in different ways. It was a lot of learning, right? And it was really tough when you're in the class and the connection drops for the 10th time. It's not easy.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So it took a lot to keep everybody motivated. But because we were able to really vision cast that and really work with that, I think it got easier with time. It is still a challenge. We were just starting a new academic year. We've got a long way to go. We are learning a lot, but the practical things have been to tech scale, to figure out how to teach kids, and really train your volunteers on how to handle this. The whole virtual teaching. Those have been some of the things that really practically helped us.
Wow. Now, you've been through the initial phase of building up. You've cruised along for a few years before the pandemic hit and through new challenges. But in all of this, and I know just by virtue of the kind of work that you do, people are at the center of everything that you do. And the first set of people are the ones who are working with you, your staff and volunteers. Now, for them to make any kind of a positive impact in the lives of these children who are the beneficiaries, they have to feel positive, not just about the vision and the nice sounding reports that we put across and all that, but just positive about the work environment. Now, I know that you have lesser number of people in a building sitting in an office than you have outside who are actually working out there.
Sure.
So how do you make sure that this positive environment that you're trying to provide to the children does not deplete in your own organization? I know that you've been identified as a great place to work with 2 years in a row. Now that is testimony to a very conscious attempt to make sure that the workplace stays positive, especially because it's so challenging and your end volunteers are working in a negative environment. Wherever they go, there's difficulty and they're trying to uh, shine through a little ray of light of hope and positivity there. But for that to come through, it has to come from the leadership and from the office itself. What are some of the conscious efforts that you have taken and anything that you've put in place to make sure that the workplace stays positive every single day for everybody?
Yeah, I think it's been again a very interesting journey, right? And there have been different kinds of needs, right? I think the main thing being intentional, right? As a leadership, you got to be intentional that hey, this is something that's not just going to happen, right? You have to really build it, and you have to protect it day in and day out. So just in terms of taking care of the staff, taking care of the leaders, taking care of the volunteers, you got to work at different levels and say, how are we going to care for them through this season? And for us, we've kind of went through various stages of how do we do that, right? How do you care about their immediate needs? Like what do you do when, you have staff who have lost their family members to, I think last year was so tough on volunteers and leaders and staff. How do you deal with the anxiety? I remember you coming and speaking to our leaders and volunteers. That tremendously helped us. So we did various workshops so that people have the knowledge to be able to take care of themselves. That's just self-care side of it. But organizationally, we were very intentional about again saying how do we keep this people together, right? And building that positive environment is extremely important, right? And it shows up in small ways. It's as simple as how you do your meetings, right? Do you get into a meeting and then say, okay, what's the business? And let's talk about this, that, and shut the laptop and leave. So we really take our meetings very seriously. For example, every meeting in you and I, right from the volunteer level, it happens in the classroom. It happens in when volunteers meet together, when leaders meet together, and the staff meet together. All our meetings always start with good things. We get into a room for a meeting, and say, hey, what was happening in your life?
Okay.
Right? So we always start with good things. Right? And what that does is, I get to know what's happening in Santosh's life. Right? And we get to celebrate together. Right? There's space to talk about what's happening in personal lives, not just professional lives. The second thing we always do, a lot of our meetings were just outside meetings, is we're very big on affirming each other. Yeah. So there are various platforms created where people can give you a high five.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The latest thing I'm doing right now is what I call is ultra affis. So I get in, I put a timer. Everybody's got 1 minute, and they have to go around the room and affirm each other. Right. So that's the other thing. And all our meetings end on a positive note, and we call it a launch. You send people out on a good note, right? You share a quote with them, share a story with them, remind them why we are together, why we are doing this together. So culture has to be built very intentionally. You have to introduce the rituals and rhythms. That's really the word, right? If there was no ritual of going to church on Sundays, how many of would actually go to church, right? Because the ritual is there, it helps us.
Right.
It's intentional. It's about being intentional, right? Of coming together as a community. And so we take our rituals and rhythms very seriously, right? And that is what helped us over the last 1 year. Intentionally taking care of people, working in small groups, really sort of focusing on those communities. And we have so many people saying that, one of the volunteers was sharing the other day that she was really suffering with severe anxiety and depression. And when she became the volunteer, and every time she came to the class and she was asked to share a good thing. And to begin with, it was a struggle. The more she did it, it actually helped her deal with her depression and anxiety. Right? And so that's what it is. It's basics, but doing it is very important.
Right. I'll go back to something that we discussed in the beginning before we wrap up. Now, there's a lot of good to be done in the world. Despite the numbers that you have on your reports, all of us know there are more children that we can reach out to. There's always more that we can do. And so you've scaled over the last 10 years. And I'm not sure about the numbers that you're looking for this year or 5 years from now, but you're looking at growth. And being a volunteer based organization, attrition is a big thing for you. Not that they fall out of love with what they're doing, but just life situations um, or anything else that happens. How have you dealt with this attrition? That let's say next year you want to be 2,500 volunteers, but some of these 2,000 are going to drop off. So you have backfill positions, and then you're looking at new ones. Uh, has it been easy for you? Or has this word of mouth that you mentioned before, when volunteers are just bringing in more of their friends saying, "I want you to be part of this"? Uh, what's your struggle with that, and what's your success stories if you have any there?
Yeah. I think last year was pretty easy because we already had volunteers, and suddenly a lot of their life plans got cancelled and they were home and they needed an outlet. So a lot of them continued. This year we found it tough recruiting new set of volunteers. But we're talking large volumes here because any given year we get about 15,000 applications.
Okay.
But what helps you again, just in terms of retention, how do you retain volunteers? And then also how do you grow volunteers, right? Retain volunteers when it gets tough is very simple, Santhosh. So think of a gym, right? Now you exactly know what you need to do to get healthy, and you get up in the morning, 5 in the morning, say the phone rings. You're going to snooze it and go back to bed. But say you have somebody to work out with, right? And then that friend comes along and says, "Hey, let's do this together." Right? And when 5 in the morning, the alarm rings, he wakes you and says, "Come buddy, let's do it." The chances of you going to gym are much higher.
Yes,
Yeah?
absolutely.
And even if you're going to gym alone, imagine keep going back. But if you make bunch of friends there, the chance of you going there and continuing it much higher.
Yes.
Right? And that works with various aspects of life. Right? And that's what we really focus on. If we say, hey, we build that positive community here, it's very difficult for people to pull away from it. They keep coming back, right? And that's really the essence of what we do. We focus on building leaders, building those communities, and the other side of it is, because I don't want to kind of take away the essence of what we do also, as much as we believe people will come for a cause but stay for the community, we strongly also preach that community without a cause is a cancer, right? If you as a volunteer, you come here and you spend 2 hours, you're like, wow, I did something today that made a difference. You'll get a taste of it and you'll keep coming back. But if it's just to feel good, eventually you're going to fade off. So you seeing the change is extremely important. Yeah? And we celebrating you as a volunteer is even more important. Me highlighting, Santhosh, see, this is what you did, and look at the impact of it is also very important. So
Great. Satish, just for the sake of our audience, when you're looking for volunteers, what's the kind of commitment that you're looking at if someone wants to sign up with you?
yeah. So what we need if somebody wants to volunteer is 1 academic year, which is about roughly 9 to 10 months.
Right.
So when you sign up, you go to the website, you pick which city you want to, which center you want to, and you'll be able to see what days is available, and then you're committing to over 2.5 hours a week for the next 9 months. And there are a couple of interviews for you to do if you want to get in. It's a very stringent process, and you have to go through.
I thought you were going to say it was a very simple process.
It is not, to be honest. And you also have to commit to going through training. Right. And so what you're committing to is 2.5 hours, and you'll be given that 1 child, 3 children that you want to work with. And what you're told in the very beginning is, hey, if you see for any reason that you cannot commit to managing about 80% of attendance, please do not sign up.
Okay.
So that is made very clear. I think that's really helped us because it really brings people who practically can give that time.
Right. And your website is the alphabet U,
AND,
and the alphabet I dot
org.in.
org. So go to youandi.org .org, and if you're interested, sign up to become part of this huge volunteer movement helping children across. Satish, so much for your conversation with us, helping us understand the volunteer movement and how to keep it going. All the best for the future.
Thank you, Santhosh. Thanks for having me.